Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 7 o'clock main news. In tonight's headlines, Israeli forces continue airstrike attacks on Gaza as Europeans lead in international efforts to end the bloodshed. The UN Human Rights Organization says more than 191,000 people have been killed in the Syrian conflict. The US says airstrikes helped to break the IS advance in Iraq, while dozens are killed in the city of Baquba. And Ukraine's president accuses Russia of violating international law after Russian humanitarian aid convoy crosses the border without permission. Israeli airstrikes continue to pound Gaza, leaving the death toll in a constant rise. Meanwhile, European governments sought UN action to end more than 6 weeks of bloodshed. More with Majd al-Wahidi from Gaza.
In Gaza, nights are spent with fear and suffering losses. Since the collapse of the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, and after the Egyptian-led peace talks hit a dead end, Israeli forces continue to pound several areas, leaving tens of people dead and wounded, the majority of them civilians.
We heard
a lot of children and women crying, and we want to rescue them. A volley of bombs fell on us. We were on the edge of losing our lives, and that of the kids. We ended up in this hospital, this place with no homes, because they are all destroyed now.
Israel's third war, known as Operation Protective Edge, left half of the population displaced and homeless. The United Nations also says 3/4 of the dead are civilians. Several human rights organizations in Gaza hold Israeli government responsible for committing war crimes.
Palestinians today are facing a real challenge. There are war crimes committed against civilians. We have no choice but to isolate, boycott and hold the occupation accountable for its aggression. The International Criminal Court and the signing of the Rome Convention are priority now. Israel should pay for its blatant crimes.
In a new move, Britain, France and Germany have launched a fresh bid at the United Nations to urge a permanent and comprehensive lasting ceasefire between Israelis and Palestinians. But for some Palestinians, political interventions to end the ongoing war should come in a broader context.
It looks that there is many mediations and many actions on the level of the political level. We have the hope that on the end to have kind of permanent solution for the Israeli assault on the Palestinians, for the Israeli grave violation to the international law. Any solution must be conditioned to the Israeli respect to the different conventions, mainly to the international law, without ending the siege and permanent ceasefire. There is no meaning for any political intervention.
Amid different accusations and beliefs, the only hope for people here is to live a normal life with real justice and freedom. Observers say the ongoing violence may end up in two possible options: either a comprehensive lasting deal with new guarantees, or a new intifada rising from the heart of Gaza with different resistance techniques. Majd al-Wahidi, Kuwait TV, Gaza.
The UN Human Rights Chief said more than 191,000 people have been killed in the Syrian conflict up to April. Navi Pillai said the figure was probably an underestimate and criticized what she called international paralysis on this issue. The figure is more than double the UN estimate given a year ago. The UN report was based on data from 4 different monitoring groups and the Syrian government, which was then cross-checked. The highest number of killings was recorded in Damascus province, with 39,393 deaths, followed by Aleppo with 31,932. At least 73 people have been killed after an armed group opened fire inside an Iraqi mosque in the country's eastern Diyala province. A security source bodies had been arriving at the hospital in the city of Baquba in Diyala province today. An army officer and a police officer said a suicide bomber first broke into the Musab bin Umair mosque, detonating his explosives before gunmen rushed in and opened fire on worshippers. Witnesses said the death toll from the attack was higher, but it was not immediately possible to verify the reports. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said U.S. forces had earlier this summer tried to rescue American hostages held in Syria, including the reporter James Foley. Speaking at a Pentagon news conference, Hagel expressed his condolences to the family of James Foley, who was killed by the Islamic State or IS militants in Syria. Both he and Army General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said the military operation was flawless, but that the hostages were no longer at the location. Hagel said U.S. airstrikes had helped to break the IS advance in Iraq, but they could be expected to regroup. Meanwhile, Dempsey stressed that the militants could not be defeated without attacking their base in Syria.
The President, the Chairman, and I are all very clear-eyed about the challenges ahead. We are pursuing a long-term strategy against ISIL because ISIL clearly poses a long-term threat. We should expect ISIL to regroup and stage new offensives. And the U.S. military's involvement is not over.
Gulf Cooperation Council Secretary General Abdulatif Zayani urged Yemeni political forces and all segments of the Yemeni society to be committed to the outcome of the national dialogue. In a press statement, Zayani asked the Yemeni parties to help create an appropriate atmosphere to implement the third stage of the GCC initiative for power transition in Yemen. Zayani denounced the recent events in the capital Sana'a, as well as the escalation in threats made by some parties. Zayani expressed the GCC support to the measures taken by the political leadership and government to maintain Yemen's security and stability. He lauded Yemeni President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi's efforts to speed up the implementation of the outcome of the national dialogue and to complete the power transition process. At least 33 people have been killed and more than 41 injured when two buses collided early today in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. The buses were coming from opposite directions and collided head-on the main road. Rescue crews, including 30 ambulances, were sent to the scene to take the injured to nearby hospitals, and local motorway was closed off. Traffic accidents are common in Egypt due to badly maintained roads and disregard of traffic laws, as road accidents killed about 13,000 people in Egypt last year. Turkey's ruling party has picked Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu to replace President-elect Recep Tayyip Erdogan as its new chairman and prime minister. Erdogan announced Davutoglu's nomination late on Thursday following a meeting of the senior leaders of his ruling Justice and Development Party, or the AKP. Davutoglu is considered a strong Erdogan loyalist and was long reported to be Erdogan's top choice as his successor. Erdogan has indicated that he plans to maintain tight control of the government and wants to transform the largest ceremonial presidency. He has said he intends to employ its seldom used powers such as summoning and presiding over cabinet meetings. The hearing at Pakistan's Supreme Court into anti-government protests in the capital adjourned today until August 25th. Imran Khan and cleric Tahirul Qadri have been leading protests in the capital Islamabad since last Friday. Talks with the government that started on Wednesday were suspended just a day after, as he continued impasse raised fears for the nuclear-armed country's stability. Lawyers that make up the Lahore High Court Bar petition have called for the protesters to be legally banned from conducting any demonstrations, which they say violate the fundamental rights of other citizens. Protesters from both sides said they will continue to voice their protests against the government. Dozens of Russian aid trucks moved into rebel-held eastern Ukraine today without Kiev's approval, saying its patience had worn out with the Ukraine government's stalling process. In Kiev, Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko accused Russia of a flagrant violation of international law after Russian humanitarian aid lorries entered Ukraine without permission. The convoy was believed to carry aid sent from Moscow for civilians in the eastern Ukrainian city of Luhansk, where pro-Russian separatists are besieged by government forces. A spokesman for the International Committee of the Red Cross, or the ICRC, said the organization was not participating in the convoy. The ICRC said it had not received enough security guarantees to help deliver the aid as violence was escalating in Luhansk.
Структури транспортної. Для чого ці тягачі і планується використати? Друге, оскільки це військові тягачі, планується перевезення.
Jakarta Governor Joko Widodo will become Indonesia's next president after a court rejected his challenger's allegations of fraud, ending the most divisive leadership contest since the country's return to democracy. The Election Commission declared Widodo the winner with 53% of the votes, a margin of more than 8 million. Local and international monitors have said there was no sign of major irregularities and praised the vote as another milestone in the country's strengthening democracy. Joko has already formed a transition team to help pick his cabinet and formulate policy that he can push through much-needed political and economic reforms to revitalize Southeast Asia's top economy. Senegal has closed its border with Guinea because of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, despite warnings that such measures are counterproductive. Senegal also banned flights and ships from Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone, the three worst-hit countries. The World Health Organization says travel bans do not work, especially if they stop doctors trying to help tackle the crisis. In Liberia, a boy shot while protesting about a quarantine has reportedly died. He was one of 3 people seriously injured on Wednesday after security forces fired at protesters angry after blockades were erected around the West Point slum. The quarantine was imposed on West Point after local residents stormed a quarantine center last weekend, looting it and allowing 17 suspected Ebola patients to leave, leading to fears the virus could spread through the area. People across Malaysia held a minute's silence and wore black today as the Southeast Asian country observed a day of mourning to mark the return of the first 20 bodies. Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 crashed after apparently being struck by a missile over war-torn Ukraine on July 17th. The loss of MH17 came just 4 months after the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 with 239 people on board. No trace of that aircraft or its passengers has been found since it went missing on a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Heavy rain has hampered rescue operations in Japan's Hiroshima prefecture, where a landslide killed at least 39 people. The number of people missing has risen to 51 after police cross-checked information with fire crews. About 3,000 rescue personnel are in the area, but heavy rain has suspended search operations. Torrential rains have led to the evacuation of up to 100,000 people. Today, all searches in the area were called off when the shape of nearby hillsides appeared to change, raising fears that more landslips could be on the way. For a chance to see our reports again, please visit our YouTube channel at MOI Kuwait News. And to recap tonight's news, here are the headlines once again. Israeli forces continue airstrike attacks on Gaza as Europeans lead international efforts to end the bloodshed. The UN Human Rights Organization says more than 191,000 people have been killed in the Syrian conflict. The US says airstrikes helped to break the IS advance in Iraq, while dozens are killed in the city of Baquba. And Ukraine's president accuses Russia of violating international law after Russian humanitarian aid convoy crossed the border without permission. Thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.